Oh, Albert, before we begin going through today's topic, can you tell us a bit about your career path so far and what you're currently focusing on?
Yes, happy to. So Albert Banks, longtime agency founder and leader. So starting back over 20 years ago, I first started my first agency, MyJive, really the early days of the web. So we were primarily a web shop. I was our first developer and then eventually our first technical director as we grew. But over the years, we grew and added different services, incorporating strategy and account service. As social media came about and digital advertising, adding sort of a media function to our company and then building out a production arm, doing video and animation, 3D. And in addition to the client work, I was also running the business, heading up operations and finance. So, of course, that also included HR, resourcing, IT, office, legal, insurance, all the fun stuff to make sure the business keeps running. About 6 years ago, we sold MyJive to Union, their local competitor here in the Charlotte market in the US. So I led the integration of MyJive into the new business, and then took over operations for the combined agency. We went through a couple of evolutions. We really recognized that digital agency was sort of a generic term, and we looked at the market and repositioned to focus on creative and performance marketing. That's really what the market was telling us was most important. I was also lucky enough to tackle some internal initiatives, worked through a true compensation strategy and a career path framework. Led the formation of our DEI committee as well. So we had some good years, some down years, right? Went through COVID. That was certainly a challenge, but ultimately drove some really good revenue growth and maintained margin while I was there. And that made us a really attractive business when we decided to go to market a couple of years ago. So co-led with my founder the sale to Valtech. They're a global digital agency. So worked through a ton of reporting for them. Obviously, due diligence was a major process and working through the legal negotiations there. So yeah, we've been Valtech for about 2 years. So ahead of that post-merger integration once again, trying to insulate the team from all the changes and the newness that was happening there. So that was a big experience and then continued to lead operations and finance for I guess Union, which really became Charlotte's Valtech Charlotte office, and continued to have some good revenue growth post acquisition. And so yeah, we're now fully integrated into Valtech, and I'm on to my next chapter. I've been heading up. Trying to help other businesses go through some of the same things that I've experienced, kind of help myself maybe 10 years ago. So that's through Apertus, which is my advisory practice. I've been through lots of building and rebuilding, trials and tribulations, so I have some good experience and tools that can help leaders maybe get through some of their struggles more quickly. I describe the services I provide there really in sort of three areas. The first is operational and financial excellence, and that's probably the most relevant to productive. Really looking at what are the agencies measuring, right? What are their KPIs? Are they the right ones? Do they have the tools set up to provide them accurate data? Are there different tools integrated so they're seeing the same thing across them? And are they sort of future facing so that they can make decisions less about the past and more about where they're headed? Helping with pricing strategy, determining what kind of bill rates or maybe what structures they may want to provide when they're pricing and sort of decoupling that a bit from cost. And then, of course, resourcing and staffing. We're a people business, right? And that's it's a quote unquote our product. So really looking through the structure. Does that make sense? How do you grow for the future? How do you plan capacity for the future? And then obviously utilization is a huge thing there to try to work through. And a lot of times people don't have targets or maybe not specific enough targets, so I can help with that area. So the second one is employee satisfaction engagement. So what is it like to work there, right? Do you have your mission, vision, values? Do you actually live them? Do you have training and management training so that you can create a great culture? And do you
Mhm.
have fair compensation strategy, right? Are you incentivizing your teams in the right way, depending on what their impact to the business is? And yeah, career path framework, like making sure people understand what it takes to get promoted and evaluate where they are versus where they need to be. And then potentially developing salary bands if you're a large enough business to sort of calibrate based on those and pair those with your career framework. And I'm a big fan of Traction, the EOS book. So, issue resolution, right? Are you creating an environment where issues are really can be identified, and there's solutions are going to be developed, and transparency around sort of tracking the evolution of those things. Um, and then the third area is really about the potential exit. Many founders and myself included, we never thought about selling our business. That's not why we started it, right? But when you reach that point in your life and in your business, you know very little. So one thing I can do is sort of help educate those that are considering it, and give them a sense of what it looks like. And over the years, I've developed a number of different partnerships, with attorneys and M&A advisors and finance folks that I could refer them to if they're sort of starting from square one. And then you may be a couple of years out from selling, but it is something that you're looking to do in the future, and you want to stress test your agency. So I can work through what we call pre-diligence. So collecting data both on your finances, your legal, doing sort of an assessment of risk, finding the skeletons in the closet and cleaning them out before you actually go to sale. Um, and then, certainly what I found, and many of my peers has found, is once you do go into the sale, you've got your attorney, you've got your finance person, you've got your advisor, but truly due diligence is on the seller, right? You have to gather all of your information. You have to convert it to whatever format or calculations that the buyer wants, right? You have to answer for that. And all the while, this is like a 6 to 12 month process. You generally keep it a secret, except for maybe a few people in leadership, and it's a huge distraction, right? So
Yeah.
you can't let it impact your business while you're going through the sale. You can't let your numbers slip, right? And then you similarly in integration, right? Once you do reach that close, that's when the work begins. There can be a significant integration process depending on the structure of the deal and how the businesses may or may not come together. So things like finance and tools and HR policies, and how do you go to market if you're combining. So those are things that again are outside of the normal flow of business, and oftentimes an additional resource can help there. So I hope to help.
Wow, you've been through so much. What I want to touch on is like, because you have all this like vast experience, like when an agency leader comes to you with questions about like, their operational challenges or how to get these, skeletons out of out of the closet and what to do to become more efficient, like where do you typically start? What is your initial approach?
Yeah, so I don't think this is probably not too surprising, but oftentimes there's like a specific thing they come, right? They say like, oh, this is the thing we need to fix or we need to do, right? And I would say generically, it falls in a category like measurement, tool, or process, right? There's something within there that's an issue, right? So the example I'm going to use for this is, hey, we're going to change our project management tool. It's like, okay. So it's great they've identified an issue, right? They think there's something wrong with this tool, but I want to make sure it's not a symptom, right, of an underlying issue that's maybe different than that. So that's great that they think that's the focus, but I want to sort of challenge the assumption, and that's why I want to start with an assessment, and it's pretty broad. This involves executive stakeholders. It's got to come from the top, right? You've got to be talking to the top people to make sure that you have the buy-in. Doing leadership surveys, meeting with subject matter experts, in specific areas of the business, and kind of getting their take a little bit independent from some of the other leadership. And this goes beyond operations and finance into the other areas I talked to you about in terms of Apprentice, is the employee approach, what's going on there, what are their long-term plans? Are they thinking about selling? If not, what's their sort of growth plan, or do they want to stay sort of boutique? Um, and I can take their data and compare that to industry benchmarks and trends, and kind of give them a sense of where they are, and where maybe they want to go. And often it'll reveal opportunities that it could be different, right, than that initial ask. Like, maybe I get through these interviews and I determine they're not actually aligned on what they want to measure within their project management system. So it's not actually about the tool. Maybe it is about the metrics, right? So sharing those results with them, I want to be collaborative. Determine, hey, these are the things that we've discovered, and so what are those objectives, and then what are the priorities? Maybe there's something that's more important than what they originally came to me for. And the why, like why do you think this is an issue? Why do you think we should prioritize this thing? And what would you expect as an outcome when we get through this? So once we have that framework, that typically can result in project or projects or sprints, right? And maybe they're overlapping, maybe they're concurrent. So in this example, maybe I say, hey, let's go through this measurement project. Let's really evaluate, the accuracy and timeliness of your metrics. Let's all get on the same page, but with what we think is the most important things to be measure, how frequently we should measure and look at them. And maybe that will result in, yes, the tool that you currently have or tool sets that you currently have don't provide you those things, and we need to move on to the next project, which is, some sort of tool adoption, migration, integration, something like that. So that's
It happens in, no matter 15 people or 500, I mean, of course, the bigger agencies have an easier time in conveying the importance of tracking time. But no matter the size of agency, like what would you say are must-watch metrics? Is time tracked one of them? What should be mandatory to keep an eye on, in your opinion? And like, what's like a foundation for healthy operations and excellence in that field?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I'll promise I'll answer it. But I have to share that like most agencies struggle in one of two ways. There's either not enough or too many. So they may not be looking at enough metrics, right? Like say you're just looking at utilization, but you don't look at your effective bill rate, right? So you may be getting a certain perspective of the business that's not a complete picture, right? So you've got false positives or negatives, and your decision making is flawed. The second is you're looking at way too many, right? It's just overwhelming. When I went through the new development of our scorecard a few years ago, I came up with at least 60 metrics we could use, right? And that's way too many, obviously, right? So we really had to narrow that down to the things that actually matter to our business. And they may be different from company to company in terms of how they're pricing or the work that they're doing. So really finding your right number of metrics that you're tracking and focusing on understanding those, and when they go up or down, what does that actually mean, so that you can take actions on them. So first off, it's just making sure you have the right ones and the right amount of them to look at. But there are definitely some straightforward ones that seem kind of obvious to me. I mean, and I'd say for sales and marketing, as you're kind of looking through the flow of work through the company, certainly looking at qualified leads. So that obviously it takes into account how your marketing efforts are going, and then new clients in terms of how your contracted amount is going, and that's more about sales closure. And then, we were big on account growth, right? So maintaining our current clients and growing them. So looking at how your current client revenue is growing, and if you're looking to have sort of a renewable recurring revenue, are you hitting your renewals whenever they happen? And then, a couple of them I mentioned before, right? Effective bill rate, making sure that you may price it one way, but if you've got too many hours, right, your actual bill rate is much lower. And then your cost rate, right? So you're comparing those two numbers, and what does it cost for those team members that are on those projects per hour? And then, of course, billable utilization. And I love to compare those to target versus sort of a generic number. I mean, obviously, you can look at it a holistic way, and that can result in sort of your project gross margin by having those two different rates. And what I just described requires time tracking. So that's certainly something that is sort of an input that's required for a lot of this information. And I also like to look at some cultural type of metrics, right? Like certainly looking at specifically voluntary turnover rate. If you have the ability in some kind of people management software to get sort of a pulse check or a weekly check, or even some information out of one-on-ones, I think that's important as well to kind of see like what is, we're seeing all these numbers around the business or finances or sales, but like what is the vibe? What's the team feeling in the moment? And that's impactful as well.
No, that must be very important because in reality, I mean, people can also be, fluffing things up and making it seem like the numbers are working, but then are they happy? Is there some kind of, are people just like taking sick leave for no reason? Are they are they satisfied with their career path? Do they have the opportunities to grow, and what is the actual state of each team? And very important, very very good note. So yeah, maybe I could ask you like how far into the future do you advise agencies to like forecast work? Like what's like a safe net for you?
Yeah, I think some of it depends on, again, the type of work you do, right? So if you're very project based, that's maybe different than if you have an annual retainer, right? So you'd maybe look at those a little bit differently. But I'd like to think you would be a little more granular in your sort of booking or scheduling of hours, certainly on a weekly basis, if not a monthly basis. And then if you're sort of looking bigger at capacity planning, you want to do that at least 3 months out. And I say that because usually you have enough information, whether it's project or retainer, to go 3 months out. I mean, certainly if you have retainer, you could spec that out much longer. But so many things change, over the course of 2 or 3 months that, it's a little bit of a fool's errand to go too much beyond that. I think you should certainly do some sort of annual planning and like have an expectation going in, but you should modify those every quarter. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. Um, and regarding like let's say like operations audits, how often should regarding this, I mean, of course, corresponding to the size of the agency, whether it's head of operations or an ops manager or even account managers or project managers in some cases, whoever's taking care of the capacity and the efficiency of the team, how often should they be doing these audits?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a real big fan of real-time dashboards or reports, right? Even if they're like on a day, they're not quote unquote real time, they're like daily, right? I find this helps with some friction, right? So an operations lead or even just another leader within the company can go and sort of asynchronously look at the data and maybe answer their own questions before they ask them. But sort of that pre-planned or scheduled stuff, I would think many times weekly, right? Typically the beginning of the week, you're looking back at the prior week's actuals. Some people say clock time daily. I would say weekly is sort of the minimum for particularly for these sort of planning purposes. So looking back at the prior week actuals and then looking at the forecast for the coming week, because again, if you've done it, a month out, you should have sort of those bookings or those scheduled hours sort of already in there, and that allows you to adapt right as the week starts if you need to adjust resourcing either for the coming week or the future. And then there's certainly some that are sort of more monthly or quarterly. Typically, that's more measurements you would get once you add the finances from a closed month. So I'd say, yeah, monthly, you're probably looking at more macro trends on the actuals and saying, okay, this wasn't just a week or two blip. Like this has been happening for a couple of months. Or hey, we've got this big project that we now know is coming, so we need to do some further out capacity planning than what we would sort of do on a weekly basis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You spoke a bit about your two acquisitions, mergers. Um, can you like tell us what were the biggest lessons you learned? Especially, I guess this the second one was bigger, more complex.
Yes.
With some takeaways like musts.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. So when Union sold, we were around 70 people. Valtech has I think, about now 6,000 person global agency, right? So obviously much larger, but it was kind of interesting when we joined in. Part of the appeal of our acquisition was there wasn't necessarily as huge a presence in the U.S. as there was in Europe. So in that respect, it was a little bit easier to work with sort of regional counterparts and get to know people, share and learn and have some impact on the culture. So a little bit of uniqueness there. But I'd say a couple of lessons are, the PMI process. I mean, when my Java and Union came together, it was a little bit homegrown process, right? Lessons learned there. But Valtech is a company that grew via acquisition, right? So they had a team, right? A team on the M&A side, but also PMI. So it was a great process. There was literally a dozen work streams that covered finance, operations, HR, tools, go to market, like everything, right? And there was a counterpart on our side and a counterpart on their side. So, I really learned, how important that is to have this robust plan going in. Obviously, you're adapting as you go and you're learning, and also having that partnership from both sides to work through those things as you've got, a new company being formed and new team members kind of getting to know each other. And so that really comes down to change management, right? That's something that is huge that we sort of knew as we made our pivot within Union what that was going to take and how deliberate that had to be. But making sure you have as much transparent, clear communication, keeping the team away from the mess, and just kind of give them the final results of integration. So certainly having a robust process there in that larger acquisition was really, really important. And then the second was really around challenges. I would always joke as our agency grew, We had the same challenges. There's just more zeros behind them. You know, like it's just a bigger challenge, but it's the same challenge nonetheless. And so it was sort of comforting to know that, we knew those challenges. It would be scary that they were bigger, but many of the same challenges we still had, even at Valtech's scale. But again, they were just, at a greater scale, or maybe there's some nuances to them that were a bit different. So as much as things get bigger, some things don't change, right? Like making sure everybody's
Sure.
clocking time across 6,000 people versus 70 people, or measuring utilization across multiple regions or something like that. So a lot of the same challenges, just at a different, unique scale. So that was sort of comforting, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. Um, Last but not least, for agencies looking to make better operational decisions, what's one piece of advice you find yourself maybe even repeating, or what's one way to start?
Yeah, I'll probably get this printed on a t-shirt, and people that have worked with me will know this one. Clarity is kindness. It's sort of based on the Brene Brown quote, but in our world in operations, clarity can really prevent major misunderstandings or conflicts, right? And so you can have all the measurement, you can have all the tools, maybe substandard processes, but if you don't have that clear communication around what the expectations are or how to do things, it's going to be a mess, and that's not an enjoyable thing for anybody. So that's why I say it's not kind, right, to set people up for failure and not have that level of clarity. Some examples I can give are, hey, look, is your leadership team aligned on the business goals, right? Are we all marching to the same beat and know where we're going? And so that you're not having them distract their teams by things that you don't want them to do, right? Like, is there a clear rationale why you clock time, right? Is there a clear understanding of how that is important, and the timing of that is important, how it affects others, right? Again, if you just say you've got to do this thing, but people don't know why, it's not nearly as impactful. So clarity is kindness is when I always tell, because we can fix all the other things, but it's really something that kind of gets forgotten in terms of communication and letting folks know why things need to happen.
Yeah, that's a really great one. Yeah, it's really easier, much easier when people are clear in their communication and
And that's some of it, right? Certainly clear communication and thorough, a lot of times communicated in the right medium, right? Like, is this an email versus a Slack message? And then, yes, repetition. That is a thing, right? Like you may have to say things probably 3, 4, 5 times. And rather than like kind of resist that, just make that part of your communication strategy.
oh, and also like I think people are kind of, they stray away or they shy from asking whether or not they understood something correctly. That's also a thing that like, just there's no stupid question.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Albert. This was a great set today, and I'll talk to you soon then.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.